Okay, so can I get your name?
Yep, my name is Brenden Resnick.
And what's your major and your year and where you're from?
So I am a freshman at Ball State in the College of Architecture and Planning, going into urban planning and development. My minors are African American Studies, Social and Environmental Justice, and Geographic Information Science. And I am from Mineola, New York, which is about 20 minutes east of New York City.
Oh, wow. So you come from like a very diverse place then.
Fairly diverse, at least racially, not as much economically.
And you're minoring in African American studies.
Yes.
Okay. So how'd you end up in this class?
I didn't really have much of an option for when I was scheduling my classes, but when I heard this is the option, I had a few 199s to choose from. I immediately was drawn to this with the emphasis it placed on race and equity and Professor Bartlett's urban studies background, and I knew it could really give me a good background for the problems I would have to tackle in urban planning. So this was really a no-brainer to enroll in.
So how would you say that your major influences like what are you trying to do with your major combined with like your minors?
Mhm.
Because you're in
So
African American studies and stuff.
Mhm. I've always had a focus in equity and just the whole level playing field argument, as if, if everyone had the same opportunity, then we wouldn't have, you'd be everyone has the same, chance to succeed. So I'd like to go into transportation planning, which just is a personal passion of mine, as if you can get to a job as easy as someone else who even has more money, then you're able to have that same opportunity. So I'm hoping with planning and African American studies that I can just find work that can make everything more just and equitable. So that's especially also why I wanted this class, because I'd be able to understand some of the problems that we're facing a bit better and the history behind them.
Okay, so can you tell me about your hometown and like what your neighborhood was like growing up?
So my hometown, it's essentially a suburb of New York City, and it's a weird relationship because it is a suburb and it's fairly small, but we're in a county of 1.5 million people, and it was quite busy. So a lot of the town was people just going through. My town borders, at least for my school district, a much higher income neighborhood. So I'm kind of like on the edge of where it starts to get less extravagant. I had Mineola specifically has a large Portuguese population, which is pretty unique and kind of just has to do with immigration trends that were before my time, long before my time. But it's not all that diverse. There really, there's a lot of European background and really just white in general. And it's also very much segregated, as you can go just 5 or 10 minutes away and you have a 90% population of African American or Hispanic. So it feels very sectioned off.
So would you say that like the concepts we learned in class about housing segregation and redlining definitely apply to where you live?
Oh, certainly. This is actually the collection of where I am is known as the first suburbs in America, and it's one of the harshest examples of how what had happened and the guidelines put in place to keep races out of the area. They're definitely still in play today.
So growing up, what was like your thinking on race?
Well, truthfully, there never was much of a thinking, at least initially. My school district is a bit more diverse than my current neighborhood. Although, when I say diverse, I do just mean racially, not economically. So in that way, it wasn't a matter of who what someone looked like, but about money. So everyone was fairly well off. I was on the lower end, but by no means in any financial trouble. Middle class, as you would say. So there really wasn't all that much. There were the third and fourth grade jokers who felt like they were being smart about people that were Asian and making, just like jokes at their expense on what people look like. And then high school, it got a bit more serious. And you see friend groups form. and it's pretty exclusive to a certain race, and maybe that just has to do with people and who they naturally attract to. But I didn't really think much about it until my middle school or high school years, when I started to kind of look at the problems behind why I don't face the same problems that others do.
So would you say that you definitely witnessed microaggressions throughout school then happening around you?
Definitely. Actually, a lot of them were on the parts of the teachers, which is the students seem to recognize more, because my district does have a fairly large Asian and South Asian population. So, there would be the natural assumptions about who were the studious students, and who could answer certain things, or who played what sports. And I would say that was the basis for a lot of the jokes that were made out of people, not of people, literally out of people. And it wasn't a very large school either. It had about 150 in each grade. And so everyone really did have the opportunity to know everyone, which did make it a little bit easier. If you were associated with something, everybody would know.
When people around you talked about race, like what were their conversations like? Did they go into depth, or was it just surface?
That's a more difficult one. It was hard for me to gauge a person's understanding about race, more so that a lot of people had a different perspective than mine, and not thinking even politically, just that they grew up in a household that they weren't white even. So me being white and them being not white is already a big differentiation. But I feel like generally a lot of the students around me did know what they were talking about and did understand the problems we faced, but the outcomes that they gained from that were very much surface level, and they did ignore, not to their fault, just that they weren't aware of the history behind it. And it's not as simple as saying stop being racist and then everything solves the problem. So I would say, understanding wise, an effort was made, but it wasn't enough.
So speaking about education in general, would you say that education has gone far enough in teaching people about race issues, or would you say that we have farther to go, like Ball State, for example?
I think like we say, surface level conversations among students, I think that by most schools and by most instructors, that's about where they stop to. Maybe part of it is just the limitations of public schooling, and you don't have much time to go through all of American history, but it is a major disservice to people that want to recognize these problems to talk about slavery in the past and then just say that we have civil rights movement now and we're all equal. I think they stick to very much the same surface level thinking that students do, talking about it separately. So education is certainly not taken enough on to try to tackle this as they should.
And speaking about like the events of 2020, so you have the pandemic and the rise of more social activism. How do you feel like this has shaped talks on race this year, especially?
Well, one, I think it was a lot easier for people to be very aggressive without being in person. One thing I did notice is that there was at least an effort to be made, where you would try to seek out the opinions that everyone had when you were in person. But as it goes, we all had the same cyberbullying discussion. You're behind a screen, and you can do damage. And I think that applies to the armchair activism argument, where like people will be really vocal on a computer, but then in real life, what change are they doing? They're just angering people. So I think the pandemic is what made it, it kind of created the environment for people to really say a lot without doing anything. So I think that the pandemic probably, if anything, it helped people to hear about everything, and you had all the time in the world to read up on it and to watch videos and to see what was happening. But I think it also made it more dangerous, where it was harder to make solutions.
So do you feel like the rise of social media activism in the end has done more harm to activism overall?
I think I have to go back to the black square on Instagram. At first, I considered that fairly harmless, but then as I kept scrolling through my feed and seeing more and more and then seeing people post again after the same day and not address anything. If this is what the extent of our activism does, 2 days later from that event, nobody talked about it anymore because everyone showed that they cared, showed that they acknowledged it, and then the conversation just shut down. So I think that is more of the dangerous part, is that people that are trying to like show that the movement is there are showing how many people posted a black square or tweeted something with a hashtag, and it didn't have any results. I think it's a good. I wouldn't say any person is wrong for doing that, but I know that is not where it needs to end.
Have you yourself been involved in any anti-racist actions or activities this year?
I think I have, in terms of anti-racist, I think, and I know we'll talk about what anti-racism actually is. I can't tell really if I've been in any anti-racist activities. I have spoken to like in forums about this now, and made efforts to try to make people more aware. So I feel I've done that. I've also tried to get involved in Muncie's communities a bit more, and a lot of the historically black communities that are still not on an equitable level to other areas of the city. So I've tried to aid them as well. So I think I've done to the extent that I can, and also with limitations of schoolwork. I've definitely tried to. I don't think I've done enough, and in all honesty, I don't know how to do enough. So it's something I hope to try to improve on.
Do you feel like this class has helped you with those activities, though?
Well, certainly, because I was coming in purely as an observer before this class started. I thought I knew all about racism, and there's always more to know. But this class gave so many more levels to what the problem is, and something like the housing segregation piece and those topics. Like as a person who's looking for planning, I've known about that, but I hadn't really put together in the overall picture how important those are and why like how slavery was a direct reason. If you can even leave a paper trail to see how we got to each stage. I don't think I ever really connected everything as much as it needed to be to say like we are here because of our actions centuries ago, and that's a fact.
And speaking on this class in general, what do you feel are some of the most important concepts you've learned?
Well, certainly the white gaze, and just knowing that the whole country, even people of color, if they have a white gaze, because that's been the norm and the standard, removing that, or at least acknowledging you can talk in the white gaze if you have it, because like I have it, and I will always have it, whether I want to or not, because I'm a white person and that's how I see the world. But knowing that's there is very important, to say that I need to empathize and understand what other people go through in their experiences. So that's something that I think could be the single most important thing that I know from this class, is that I need to know that my perspective is the way it is because of who I am. And that's physically, mostly physically, but it definitely leads into mentality. And then just about how racism is everything and everything is racism. And that, everything isn't outwardly racist or intentionally racist, but it has the same result. So everything needs to be done to keep the racist side out.
And would you say that Ball State has done enough in addressing race topics? Or what would you say they need to do in order to effectively address race topics?
Well, I think if you are an honors college student, you have the opportunity more so than someone who might be in just the general curriculum to learn about this, as we've seen from Bartlett's class. But especially like the new multicultural center that's being built, nobody seems to know what that is. Even like as it's being constructed in a pretty central part of campus, I don't think the university as a whole, like those emails that go out that don't mean anything. Like I don't think they've at least shown the students, maybe behind the scenes they are doing a lot, but until they show the students that's being done, I can't really say that they've done enough at all. I feel that there's a lot of responsibility for them to make their students comfortable, and it's not been enough. But not just comfortable, they need to be educated, because that is the point. of college. You're not just supposed to learn a trade. You should know, you should learn about what you're going into the world. And right now it's so evident in the country that it's still a problem.
And with that being said, how do you think, like, what was your takeaway with Ball State's response to the caravan that was on campus?
Well, first of all, the fact that we have an emergency alert system. The fact that nothing was issued, it's supposed to be used when there's a danger to students on campus. And whether that's perceived or, a perceived danger is a danger because someone thinks they could be threatened. And I think that was an initial fail, and someone had to decide either to do that or to not to do that. So someone decided not to do that. But the email that went out, although I presume best intentions of President Mearns, and I find that his message encompassed slightly more than some other universities have sent out. The part where he referenced the beneficence pledge, at first I thought was a sweet moment, like, yeah, we're all in this together. But the pledge is something the students take, and we don't know that the people that came on the campus were even part of the student population. And truthfully, now it just feels like the liability is on the student body to keep this from happening, when it's not just us that are, the reason for it. So that part just frustrated me, that we weren't, we were saying, well, if we all go with the beneficence pledge and just stick to it, we'll be fine. And truthfully, that would have already been the argument, because we all already took that pledge. So I don't find that did enough. And just the fact that we've not heard anything for, it's been a month now. And there were talks, in the email, it was, we would consider future changes. And I've heard no, I'm not able to provide input. I've not heard any decisions to be made. So I feel like so far the bar is set very low for what we hope to accomplish.
Would you say that a new sort of space needs to be created on campus in order for these issues to effectively be talked about? Or do you think there are already spaces for these issues to be talked about?
Well, I know the Multicultural Center has been touted a bit as like this great centerpiece to campus that these can be talked about, but I really don't agree with it. I think talking about culture and then talking about racism is not in the same boat. And just because they have to do with background does not put them in the same boat. So that Multicultural Center, while I think it will be a great way to understand other people, to actually find the problems that racism creates, that's not the space for it. And truthfully, I think it would kind of take away from the center if that's the place that's made for it. So I think the place that should be we should be talking about this that's in all of the classrooms. Every classroom on campus is a place where we can learn about these problems. And I think it's just the fact that this isn't made a bigger part of the curriculum that's really bringing that down.
So would you say that Ball State itself needs to be going to its educators and forming a sort of plan to talk about these issues?
That's what I would hope for. And again, through that process, while I'm sure I don't blame the administration for any of the decisions they've made, they are very, as political as they may be, they make sense on the surface, but there's so much more to be taken to it. So I think as long as they show the students what's being done and also listen to the students about what they want, as they're the ones attending the school, I think that is the way forward.
And then going back to individual experiences, have you yourself experienced or witnessed any racism on campus?
I think on an individual level, I've really not. Again, I'm a white guy. Like, I'm really in one of the least marginalized categories you could ask for. So, and my friends as well, even those who are people of color, I haven't seen a large problem on an individual scale on campus. I think what's just impacting more is the pressure of, especially in the honors college, the pressure of being a student of color here, where there are so few people around who are also students of color. And I know what we can say in Ball State as a whole, that can be represented in the demographics. I think it's more the systemic issues that trickle down to affecting the individual person. Because myself, there's very little that could impact me from my background, but there are definitely things that could impact others.
So how do you feel like your gender, your class, your region, or even your religion has impacted your thinking on race?
Well, I would say growing up, being so close to New York City, I really did interact with as many cultures as you could have in the country. New York City is a very diverse place, but that is not to be confused with not racist, and also not to be confused with unsegregated. Because while diverse, there are entire neighborhoods of New York City where you cannot find a white person, or you cannot find a Hispanic person, or Asian, or black person. And they are very much strict borders of class, of race, of everything in between. So growing up, I was exposed to a lot, and I made an effort, kind of to my parents' dismay, of going to places where I didn't, fit in. And then I felt like I didn't fit in. I was stared down. I was approached a few times, but it was really of like a questioning of existence type of thing. So I think, and that's the most important thing, is my class. I rode transit a lot, and that was because of my interest. I was a white middle class guy. My family had a car. I could, my parents could drive me. I could drive myself now. I could drive. I chose not to get more of the experience I need and to understand what people have to go through and suffer through when service doesn't get them where they need. So I felt as that even on the buses, I would be the white guy, and I would be looked at, and it really, I didn't pity myself, but I felt like, how did we even get here in the first place? So I think growing up, possibly, and where I grew up is part of the reason I have the interest for the career I look for now. But I think as a whole on race, if I didn't do my own research and I went through my high school just, as everyone else would, I would be so unprepared for what I would be facing in the real world, and the troubles that people face.
So bearing this like experience in mind, would you say that everything is either anti-racist or racist, or would you say that you can claim a neutral ground in between the two?
I think decisions on face value can be neutral, but you have to look at how they impact populations. Like, if we're gonna say we want to put a park in, and say, how can a park be racist, or well, the neighborhood you're putting it in, or the neighborhood you're not putting it in, that can be racist, or that can be anti-racist. So I do think for almost everything there is the opportunity to have that attachment to it, and it's just important to look beyond who you think it's going to impact, and really get into why it's going to impact people and how. So I do think that everything needs to be at least considered in that way. Maybe not in practice. I really don't think, like, if I'm going to fix a street light, is that racist or anti-racist? I think it's more about making sure the decisions that you're doing aren't adversely affecting populations that you don't know about.
So going back to the pandemic, I don't want to be stereotypical, but would you say that the same type of people that are anti-maskers also might be the same type of people that are opposed to learning more about how to be an anti-racist, or outright just not seeing how racism still exists today?
Mm-hmm. I think there could be a correlation, and not because racist people are also racist against masks. I think it's more about the partisanship and wondering, like, I mean that's always been a problem, is that even if you don't believe something yourself, you bandwagon, and you're associated with the party, so you have to follow the party to be a true member of the party. I think in general I've seen, let's just say, like, Democrats wear masks more often, although now it's even like the story of governors that are ignoring their own orders. I think it's mostly people for the pandemic that either don't believe in science or just don't want the personal inconvenience of wearing a mask. I don't know if it's as deep to align with racism, but I do think ignorance is the root of both. So definitely that's why a correlation exists.
And would you say that this ignorance is willful? Are these people actively, not seeking the information, or are they just not aware that the information is there?
Well, so are you talking about for the virus, or for racism, or for both?
Let's say for both.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll be honest, I started this class as a much more optimistic person, and trying to assume that people just didn't know what they were dealing with. But while I think it is difficult to know what you're talking about unless you actually do the research, now it's about the fact that you don't want to even look at the research or kind of see what you're dealing with. I think it's a very intentful decision made, and I do think it has to do with elected officials and who you're listening to and who you're trying to get into office. But yeah, I think given what's happened this year, you'd have to be pretty steadfast on not knowing anything to try to ignore. Let's take police brutality as an issue. If you are still unsure of whether that's a problem, you can argue of the roots of the problem, but if you don't want to acknowledge that as an issue, and that is something, while disproportionately greatly affecting people of color, police brutality is a problem for everyone, and it should be something that collectively we all want to solve. But if you don't want to address that, I can't assume that those are beginning with good intentions anymore. So I think now I've realized perhaps it's not your fault that you don't know how to understand something or address something, and that's why something like this class is good. But if you haven't made the decision to try to learn more, I think that would be, unfortunately, that's a very hard decision that is made by yourself.
Would you say that white privilege is part of this blinder for most people?
Mm-hmm. Well, white privilege has become such a trigger word. like if you hear some people I've even discussed with in my own community, are just like, white privilege doesn't exist. And that's like, if they're going to make that statement and not listen to anything after, fine. But I think what people don't understand about white privilege usually is it's not necessarily advantages that white people have, but it's disadvantages they don't have. And that's, I think, a disconnect a lot. But, I understand almost. It's like being white, to sound like it could sound like a personal attack, like you did better in life because you were white. And you know what I did? I acknowledge all of the hard work I have done to get me to the place I'm at, but I do also acknowledge that I didn't face the same challenges that everyone else did that may have gotten them to the same place. So white privilege and the white gaze that I kind of brought up, they overlap immediately. And I think it does have to do with like, get over the initial shock that you have been placed in a better body to do well in the country, and then just start to understand it. It's not a fault of yourself, but it is something you have to acknowledge and deal with.
And then moving towards more of like Kendi's book, so the ideas of anti-racism, racism, racist policymakers and such, what would you say is the big like connection between his main definitions, and what would you say like his main point he's trying to get across?
I think it may have been a slight exaggeration of everything being racist and anti-racist, or at least the emphasis or overemphasis placed on it. But that was completely intentional, in my opinion, because I think it's a mindset that we all have to get in, and that was his point, is that we need to start thinking of everything as racist and anti-racist to see how it impacts people. Because if you don't acknowledge that and you decide things without thinking of ramifications, then that's how you're going to go about life, and people are going to be unfairly affected. So I think to take away from his book is that the gaze that we need to be looking at everything is through race. And that's the only way to make a more just world.
And then addressing his chapter on capitalism, would you agree with his idea of the conjoined twins, that capitalism and racism feed off of each other?
I have to, because there's nothing, capitalism by nature and the survival of the fittest, how do you become the fittest? What advantage do you have that someone else may not have, or what disadvantage do you not have that someone else may have will get you there? Because capitalism on its own relies on individuals that make decisions, and they have their own minds and their own freedom. And while I don't view capitalism as purposefully evil, but the way it treats a lot of people in this country, it pretty much seems like a demon. So I think capitalism has to be addressed when talking about, why things are unfair. It's because you have people making the decisions that don't want to be fair. So I definitely think that he makes a pretty strong argument for it at least being very difficult to solve the problem while keeping the tenets of capitalism intact.
And when addressing like the corruption and the racism in policy itself, what would you say needs to be done? Like, where do we start?
Well, I would view a, a lot of what we already have in place is actually fairly strong legislation. It's the enforcement aspect that's not. For example, the like if we talk about the Civil Rights Act, and that programs getting federal funding need to not discriminate. Well, the enforcement of that act is so rarely followed through on, at least properly. So I think more so what needs to happen is that the rules that are already in place need to be much more strictly handled, and everything, I don't want to go ahead and just increase bureaucracy everywhere, but every decision that is made, as Kendi stated, is it racist? And really go deep and beyond the no, it just doesn't displace this many people, or that type of thing. I think that's where it needs to start. And this is where the liability does go to the American people. The elected officials that we get into office need to make sure those are the people that are going to fight for these policies. So it's going to start first with making stronger what's already there, and then making new legislation that's even stronger. But all of that requires the American public to commit the people that are going to do it.
And these racist policymakers, would you say that racism is the factor behind them making the policies, or would you say it's more of a money power issue?
I think, as we've talked about, white people are comfortable usually, and not necessarily just white people that are wealthy, regardless of their race, are comfortable, and I'm sure would like to continue being in that status. So I truthfully, to say it's a racist policy, and not a racist person, it's hard to separate the two if you're making that decision, though I think the reasons behind it are not necessarily just a hatred of a certain race, but it's the preference of keeping yourself in a good position. So I think that's the first thing, is that people who are selfish are the biggest problem. Because truthfully, I don't think a lot of our representatives truly embody their districts. It's just they appeal to the voter base that are going to get out there and vote them in, and then they do whatever they want, and it's a free-for-all. So I think the racist policymakers are truly the ones that are looking out for themselves, and that's going to be the first problem to get them out.
What would you say needs to be done to almost eliminate this money in politics issue that is helping fuel these racist policies?
Well, currently political action committees, and anything that gets them donations, they get to hide behind a lot of curtains to see who their donors are. Because right now, I mean, it's not like I wouldn't go so far as to say you should be stopping certain people from donating all the time, though to not even know who's doing it is the biggest problem. So I think money in politics, the way our current system is set up, is inevitable, but at least to understand and be able to say, well, yeah, like, this corporation is supporting them because they're going to help them, and then they're going to help them not because it's what the people want, but because it's what their donors want. So I think the first thing is be able to address it, and see who's doing it.
And would you say, I don't want to say that these corporations are necessarily racist, but would you say that the use of capitalism in order to generate a profit for themselves ends up inherently being racist?
I'll give an example. Something that I think I've opened my eyes to a lot more recently is environmental racism, and that decisions are made, like, you put a landfill in a place that is more filled with people of color and minorities, just people that are not white. And this company is not necessarily making that decision because they want to hurt communities of color, but it's cheaper and there's less political opposition to putting it in a white or upper class neighborhood. So it's that type of thing where the decision itself may not be viewed as super racist, but look at what it turns into. And that, I think, goes back to how everything has to be racist or anti-racist, and that it does apply because you have to look at the long term.
Okay, so we're about at the 40-minute mark, so I'm gonna move to like the future and like talking about that. Okay, so what do you think this course has meant to you personally, like in the long run?
Well, I always knew there was more for me to learn. And I think this course has really helped me to find the tenets that I need to understand this problem. Because I don't, the learning about racism and how it affects people is a never-ending process. And until the day you die, there will always be more to know. But I think this course has given a great, solid ground to base my opinions and ideas off of and to learn even more.
Is there anything that you learned that has like particularly stuck with you or that you will take with you?
I think it is Kendi's book, and always looking to make sure something that is done is just. And I don't think I will always say that everything is racist or anti-racist, but everything does have outcomes that lead to either. And I think that's just what I need to take with me to understand that I need to look at every decision I make through this lens.
And what do you personally think it means to be an anti-racist?
I think it is making the effort, the initial effort, to ensure that your actions are not affecting people of color more than they are affecting everyone. Because anti-racism should be the goal of equality. So that is what decisions are based off of on. And I think to be anti-racist is to be in the constant search for equality.
So would you say that anti-racism is almost a sort of lens that we need to be looking at the world through?
If it's at least compared to our current lens of white, then certainly.
Okay. And then where would you say you see Ball State 10 years from now in discussions on race?
Well, I see the honors college probably in a very good place. As truthfully, I've been shocked in a very good way about how much we've discussed problems of race in this class. I find that I hope to see Ball State in the next few years go through some reform processes and just make it a bit more central and important. I don't think race has to be the center of our curriculum, but if it's not the center of our curriculum, then where is it? Because right now it's just not. It can't be found. So I think this one I will choose to be optimistic for, because I think that we're in a very turbulent period, and I need it to be grounded in actual response, because again, it can't be the same thing about posting a black square. So I think in Ball State's near future, I'm pretty optimistic. I think the Honors College is already doing a fantastic job of trying to make change, and I hope that Ball State's administration will be getting the message very soon.
And where would you say you see the United States in 10 years, speaking like in terms of the talks on race?
Well, I'm hopeful for the next 4 years of the presidency. I don't think Joe is our solution. I don't think he ever was. I don't think Kamala is our solution either. I don't think either of them really show what the future should be. But I think that compared to the previous administration, I think that more change can go through. And I think they will be more vocal on making it a priority. And I find that a lot of the freshman congressman class, I do think that people are more outspoken, and we're showing diversity again. Diversity, especially knowing that people can be racist themselves against their own people. Diversity is not the solution itself. But I'm fairly hopeful that in the national conversation, right now since June, it's been you'd be hard pressed to find someone who's not aware of anything that's happening. So I think in terms of the conversation, we're finally where we need to be. And now it's about committing to action. Sorry.
Where do you see yourself, say, years down the road from now, and what do you feel like you're going to take from this class specifically with you?
I think I'm hoping to do what I'm doing now. I may be in a certain job that will allow me to do it better, but truthfully, the goal of everyone should just be to make things more equitable and do the part in what you can to do that. So I'm hoping to take from this class that everything needs to be anti-racist, and to hopefully use that to make, to inspire the decisions that I make. I know people talk about if it's got to be personal. And for me, I'm trying to make it personal. Just being someone that's not as impacted as a lot of the problems as some of my friends are, I have to be able to understand it. So I'm hoping that from this course, I'll definitely take everything I've learned from it and use it to try to enact as much good change as I can.
And then this is kind of like a leap in a different direction, but something got me thinking. So speaking about like politicians in general, do you feel like political parties, maybe even say the Democratic Party, have used the minority communities in order to get votes without actually enacting change for minorities?
Well, if I could leave it at Hillary Clinton's hot sauce in her purse comment from a couple years back, I think that would show enough. And this is something politicians have always been guilty of. And it's the same way that they only go to swing states to campaign. They're in it to get votes. And that doesn't mean they don't care about the problems, but I definitely don't think they're as stressed to follow through on their promises. Which is why I think the movements right now that have been, there was an Instagram account. It was settle for Biden, and I loved it so much because truthfully, it's what everyone wants to do. And it posted on election when he was determined to be the president elect that it's not over yet. So we got him in, good, and there's so much more to be done. Because I think politicians have used everyone. There's no one that is free from their grasp. So I'm thinking that it's unfortunately been a reality where they can't, if you're appealing to the black vote will add to your voting totals. It's just a reality. So I think while it does impact everyone like that, what's more important is to focus on making sure that they make true on their promises.
Do you feel like the minority community recognizes this, though? Recognizes that political parties might use them in order to get votes?
Well, I'm not. I don't think I'm even in the position to answer it. Just because I don't know what their experience is when they vote. Make these decisions. But I think the fact that there was a significant population, like take Florida for example, there were a lot of Latino, members of the Latino population that voted Trump. And I think each person, it's more about bringing someone and whittling them down to what their race represents. And I think that's the main problem, is that people are entirely themselves apart from what their race is. They have their own political beliefs. And of course, I don't mean to say that Republicans or Democrats or either party is what is the racist one. So I think people vote in their best interest. I don't necessarily think most of the population is that easy to win over just by these statements, because I think a lot of people do realize that, that ultimately they decide who gets elected, and the people that want to get elected are going to say things to them. But I don't think it necessarily splits based on party. I think both sides are definitely susceptible to it.
And would you say that President Trump is a reaction to white supremacy still present in this nation?
George W. Bush had to explain after 9/11 to supporters at his rallies that the war wasn't against Islam. And his supporters, a lot of what they said was like, they said he didn't. Actually, and even when Obama was running against McCain, that one of them said, "Oh, he's an Arab," or he said that Arab. I don't know how they pronounced it. It was very odd. But I think the people that Trump does appeal to have a lot. Some of them are just straight up white supremacists. You can't mask it. But a lot more people, I think, hold these beliefs and are ignorant. Not that they don't, like, they know what they're doing. I'm sorry. It's, again, I used to be more optimistic and like, well, maybe they just aren't aware of what's happening. But I think people do just decide that it's not important to try to change these beliefs. So I think that I don't think it's necessarily all white supremacy, because truthfully, a lot of them do, they say like he handles the economy better. I may disagree with that, but okay, that's a reason. So I don't think necessarily he's here because the entire country, half the country, at least over half the country that voted him in, although not by a popular vote, is a white supremacist. So I don't think it's a reaction to that. I do think that it played a role, and it's the root of ignorance of the cause of so many problems.
Would you say that it does kind of display a bit of white fragility, though? Like his base displays white fragility, white victimhood?
Well, to even say that, many people that have voted for him will not acknowledge white privilege, or they say that it wasn't an advantage. And again, it's hard to make that argument as the whole, because he has voters who are not white. And then it's like, well, of course, white privilege doesn't affect them. They're not white. So I think, and that's also the trouble of saying like his voter base, because his voter base is very diverse, as is Biden's. And it's about appealing to certain issues. So I think the main problem is that, well, are we thinking of everything as racist or anti-racist? No, because if you were to, whether you're a minority or not, or whether you'd be affected from a racist policy or not, you're not thinking of it.
Okay, so I think this has been a really good conversation, and we can end here.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for your time.
Of course.